October 3rd, 1944. Eastern France. The rain had finally stopped, but nobody in the small town of Saint-Remy seemed relieved. American trucks filled the narrow streets. Infantrymen from the 4th Armored Division moved cautiously between damaged stone buildings. Children watched from broken windows. Elderly civilians stood silently in doorways. Something was wrong. Private Daniel Mercer noticed it first. The town had been liberated 3 days earlier. German forces had retreated east. The shooting had ended. Yet nobody smiled. Nobody celebrated. Nobody thanked the Americans. Instead, the civilians looked afraid. Mercer glanced towards Sergeant Frank Hollis. "Something doesn't feel right." Hollis nodded. "I know." At the center of town stood the mayor's office. The French tricolor hung from the balcony. Below it stood a line of civilians. Women, old men, teenagers. Waiting. Not speaking. Not moving. Just waiting. The Americans had no idea why. Then a woman suddenly stepped out of the line. She was thin, covered in dirt. Her face looked exhausted. She pointed toward the mayor's office and began shouting in French. The soldiers couldn't understand her words, but they understood her anger, and they understood her tears. The entire street froze. Nobody knew it then, but within 48 hours, that woman's desperate accusation would climb through military headquarters, reach General George S. Patton himself, and force one powerful French official to face a reckoning he never expected. The woman was escorted to an American command post. A translator named Luc Moreau arrived shortly afterward. Captain Robert Hayes listened carefully. The woman introduced herself as Claire Bouchard. Then she made a shocking claim. According to Claire, dozens of local families were starving. Not because of the Germans. Because of the town's own mayor. The room fell silent. "What do you mean?" Hayes asked. Luke translated. Claire's voice trembled. She explained that during the occupation, emergency food supplies had been hidden throughout the region. When liberation arrived, the mayor had gained control over distribution. But food wasn't being shared fairly. Families who supported him received bread. Others received nothing. Widows were turned away. Children were turned away. Even former resistance families were denied supplies. Captain Hayes frowned. "You're telling me people are starving while warehouses are full?" Luke translated. Claire nodded. Then she began crying. The room stayed silent. Outside, soldiers exchanged uncertain looks. Nobody wanted to believe it. Not after everything the town had already suffered. A patrol was sent immediately. Lieutenant Michael Grant led 6 soldiers and a translator across town. The mayor greeted them politely. His name was Henri Delacroix, a well-dressed man in his 50s. Confident, calm, respectable. When confronted with the accusation, he smiled. A misunderstanding. The translator relayed the answer. Grant wasn't convinced. "We'd like to inspect the warehouses." The smile faded slightly. "I'm afraid that's not possible." Grant stared at him. "What do you mean, not possible?" "The supplies belong to the municipal government." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. American soldiers glanced at one another. The answer made no sense. People were hungry. Children were hungry. And warehouses were being kept closed. The inspection request became an argument. The argument became a standoff. By sunset, word had spread throughout town. Hundreds of civilians gathered in the square. Nobody shouted. Nobody protested. They simply watched. Waiting. Hoping. The tension became unbearable. The next morning, American intelligence officers became involved. Major William Cooper arrived with additional personnel. Witnesses were interviewed. Records were examined. Stories began matching. Again and again. A widow named Marguerite Fournier claimed she had been denied food 3 times. A disabled veteran named René Martin described watching officials hand supplies to political allies while hungry families stood outside. A local priest quietly confirmed the accounts. The evidence kept growing. Yet every request for warehouse access was denied. Henri Delacroix continued insisting that local authority belonged to him. Not to the Americans. Not to military officers. Not to anyone else. Captain Hayes slammed a report onto his desk. "This is insane." Major Cooper agreed. "What happens if he's right?" Hayes looked up. What? What if technically he has authority?" The room grew quiet. Nobody knew. France had been liberated. The Americans weren't occupiers. This was supposed to be French territory. French administration. French leadership. The situation became increasingly complicated. Military lawyers reviewed regulations. Commanders exchanged messages. Hours turned into days. Meanwhile, civilians continued standing in food lines, waiting, hungry, watching, and the reports kept climbing higher. Eventually, they reached 3rd Army headquarters. Then they reached a desk few people expected. General George S. Patton read the file late at night. Several officers stood nearby. Nobody interrupted him. Page after page. Witness statements. Photographs. Interviews. Reports. Patton remained silent. Finally, he closed the folder. The room waited. Patton looked toward Colonel James Ridley. How many children? Ridley checked the report. Estimated 180 directly affected, sir. Patton nodded slowly. Nothing else. Just a nod. The room remained silent. Then Patton stood. Prepare transportation. Ridley blinked. Sir, I'm going there. The officers exchanged glances. Patton rarely traveled for matters like this. Yet nobody questioned him. Yes, sir. The convoy arrived the following afternoon. Word spread instantly. The general was here. Soldiers lined the streets. Civilians gathered behind barriers. Nobody spoke much. They simply watched. Patton stepped from his vehicle. His uniform was immaculate. His expression unreadable. Rain clouds drifted overhead. The town square seemed frozen in time. Henri Delacroix emerged from the mayor's office. He appeared confident, even relieved. Perhaps he believed this visit would validate his authority. Perhaps he believed rank would support rank. If so, he was mistaken. Patton entered the building. A meeting began immediately. American officers sat on one side, French officials on the other. The atmosphere felt heavy. Nobody smiled. Nobody relaxed. Patton opened the file, then looked directly at Delacroix. The mayor maintained eye contact. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Patton asked a simple question. Are people hungry in this town? The translator related. Delacroix shifted slightly. There have been shortages. Patton nodded. Are the warehouses full? A pause. Some supplies remain. The room went silent. Patton turned another page. Have requests for inspection been denied? Another pause. Certain procedures. Patton interrupted. Yes or no? The translator repeated the question. The mayor swallowed. Yes. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Patton simply looked at him. The silence felt worse than shouting. Much worse. Finally, Delacroix spoke again. I am protecting local authority. Patton leaned back slightly. Everyone waited. His voice remained calm. Authority exists to serve people. Nobody moved. Patton continued. When authority protects itself instead, it becomes something else. The room stayed silent. Delacroix looked away. For the first time all day, he seemed uncertain. Patton closed the file, then stood. Open the warehouses. The translator repeated the order. Delacroix hesitated. Patton stared at him. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Finally, the mayor nodded. Yes. Outside, crowds gathered as locks were removed. American soldiers watched. French civilians watched. Even children climbed walls for a better view. The warehouse doors opened slowly. Gasps spread through the crowd. Food. Crates of food. Stacks of flour. Canned goods. Medical supplies. Enough supplies to help the town for weeks. The silence that followed felt almost unbelievable. Some people cried immediately. Others simply stared, unable to process what they were seeing. Private Mercer stood beside Sergeant Hollis. Neither man said anything. A little girl suddenly ran forward. She couldn't have been older than 8. An American soldier handed her a loaf of bread. She hugged it against her chest, as if it were treasure. Mercer looked away. His eyes burned. Sir, he whispered. Hollis nodded. I know. Distribution began immediately. Military medics assisted. Local volunteers joined. Church workers helped organize families. For the first time since liberation, the square felt alive. People smiled. Children laughed. Mothers cried openly. The mood transformed almost overnight. Yet one final question remained. What would happen to Henri Delacroix? The answer surprised many. Patton did not order dramatic punishment. He did not publicly humiliate him. He did not demand revenge. Instead, an investigation transferred the matter to French authorities. The mayor was removed from control pending review. The decision frustrated some soldiers. They wanted harsher consequences. Patton disagreed. Later that evening, Captain Hayes asked why. Patton paused before answering. Because war was ending. Because rebuilding mattered. Because justice and vengeance were not the same thing. The room listened carefully. Patton looked toward the window. Outside, civilians carried food through the dark streets. The goal isn't to win arguments, he said quietly. The goal is to help people stand again. Nobody replied. There was nothing to add. The next morning, Patton departed. No speech, no ceremony, no celebration. Just another convoy disappearing down a muddy French road. Yet years later, residents still remembered that visit. Not because a famous general arrived, not because of military power, but because someone finally listened. One hungry woman spoke. A translator listened. Soldiers investigated. Officers refused to ignore what they saw. And eventually, a general understood that leadership sometimes means confronting allies just as firmly as enemies. World War II was filled with battles, filled with tanks, filled with gunfire, filled with victories and losses. But sometimes the most important moments happened far from the front lines. Sometimes they happened in quiet rooms, around simple questions, asked by people willing to face uncomfortable truths. Because war tests more than courage. It tests character. It tests responsibility. It tests whether power serves people or serves itself. And on a rainy week in liberated France, one town learned that real leadership isn't measured by authority alone. It's measured by what you do when authority stands in the way of what is right. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collided, make sure to subscribe.